The order that would decide everything was 9 words long, and I had signed for it myself, at 4 that morning, in a corridor that still smelled of floor wax and cold rain. I am telling this the way it happened, because there are men in the realm who still believe that Corwin Vale humiliated a prince of the blood for sport, on the steps of the royal box, in front of the whole gathered court. I stood 8 feet from him when he did it. I heard what he said and I heard what he did not say, and I have spent the month since deciding that if no one else will set it down plainly, then it falls to me, who held the same post and read the same order and would have done exactly as he did if my legs had been the ones to move first. My name is Halden Rowe. I was a sergeant of the household guard on the night of the Isolde Memorial, and I have worn the red wool and the tall black bearskin for 19 years, which is long enough to know the difference between a man refusing an order and a man keeping one at terrible cost. What Corwin Vale did that night was the second thing. It only looked like the first. Let me put you where I was. The grand hall of the palace had been dressed for a memorial gala, and the whole realm of Eldermore had come to it. 10 years to the night since Queen Isolde died, the first wife of King Alaric, the mother of the crown prince and the princess, the woman half the country still called simply the Good Queen, as if there had only ever been one. The king had wanted it marked. Not a funeral again, a remembrance, warm rather than black, with music she had loved and the great doors thrown open and the children she had left behind sitting where all could see them. A living tribute, the invitation said. Come and remember her with light. The royal box was the heart of it. In the grand hall it is not a box at all but a raised gallery of white stone at the head of the room, 6 broad steps up from the floor, railed in gilded iron, roofed by the arms of the house of Harrowgate carved into the vault above. From it the royal family looks down on the whole court, and the whole court looks up at them, and everyone understands without a word being said that the 6 steps between the floor and the gallery are the most important distance in the kingdom. Below them is the realm, above them is the crown. My post that night was the foot of those steps. Corwin's was the head of them, the last man before the gallery itself, the single figure standing between the whole bright room and the family it had come to honor. It is the most senior post a guardsman of our rank can hold. You do not chatter on it. You do not lean. You stand as still as the stone you stand on, and you watch the room the way a lighthouse watches the sea, and you pray that nothing happens, because if something happens on those steps it happens in front of everyone. Corwin was 34 that year, and he had held the head of steps post more often than any of us, because he was the steadiest man in the company and the officers knew it. He was not a large man. That surprises people who have only heard the story. He was lean and quiet with a long plain face and pale eyes that seemed always to be somewhere just past you, and when he stood at his post you forgot he was a person at all. He became a fixed point, a thing the room turned around. New men thought him cold. Men who had served beside him knew better. I had seen him carry a fainting page down 3 flights without breaking step, and I had seen him hold a door against a shoving, screaming crowd with nothing but his own weight and a level voice, and I had seen him weep once, exactly once in the dark of the guardroom, on the anniversary of something he never named. He was not cold. He was disciplined, which is a different and rarer thing, and the difference is the whole of this story. Now, the order. At 3:30 that morning, before any of the flowers had come, before the musicians had tuned a single string, the captain of the household guard walked the night watch himself, which he did not often do, and he carried a sealed writ with the king's own cipher pressed into the wax. He gathered the senior men, Corwin, myself, 2 others, into the guardroom, and he broke the seal in front of us, and he read the order aloud twice, and then he made each of us read it with our own eyes and signed the muster sheet beneath it to swear we had understood. I can give you the 9 words that mattered because they are burned into me. The rest was formal language, dates and styles and citations of law. But the heart of it, the operative clause, was this: the Duke Reynald is barred from the presence of the royal children. Barred, not discouraged, not asked to keep his distance. Barred by writ under the king's cipher on the standing recommendation of the crown's own bench, which meant a court, which meant judges, which meant it was not the king's temper but the king's law. The order named the Duke Reynald by full style and title. It named the 3 royal children by name: Prince Torin, who was 11, Princess Malin, who was 9, little Prince Bram, who was 6. And it drew a line the Duke was not to cross, not to be in their presence, not at any occasion, public or private, until the writ was lifted by the same bench that laid it. The royal box, where the children would sit that night in full view of the realm, was the presence of the royal children made into a place. If the Duke came up those steps, the order was broken. It was as simple and as absolute as that. The captain looked at each of us when he had finished. "You 4 hold the box tonight," he said. "The head of the steps is the line. If the Duke Reynald presents himself there, he does not pass. I don't care what he wears, who he came with, or what name he carries. He does not pass. Is that understood?" We said it was understood. "Say it back to me." "He does not pass," we said, all 4, and Corwin's voice was the flattest and the plainest of the 4. And I remember thinking even then that of the 4 of us, he was the one who would truly have to do it, because his was the post at the top. Here is the thing you have to understand about the Duke Reynald, and I will be careful, because he is a real man in this realm, and it is easy to make a villain of him, and I am not sure that is fair. He was the king's own cousin. A prince of the blood by descent, though not in the line of succession, a grandson of an old king through a younger branch, a man born to the 2nd rank of royalty, which in Eldermore is a rank high enough to open any door, and low enough to breed a lifelong resentment about the doors that stay shut. In his prime he had been a figure at court, handsome, loud, generous with money that turned out not always to be his, the kind of royal cousin who was photographed at every launch and every gala and every ribbon cutting, beloved by the crowds who did not have to deal with him, and mistrusted by the household that did. And then, some years before that night, there had been the scandal. I will not lay out the whole of it, because much of it was heard behind closed doors, and the parts that were public were ugly enough. What matters for this story is the shape of it. The Duke Reynald had kept company he should not have kept, and made promises with the crown's name that were not his to make, and when the accounting came, it was not only money that was missing but trust, and worse than trust. There were questions about the safety of people who had been near him. There were questions, specifically and terribly, about children, not his own conduct toward them. I want to be plain. Nothing so black as that was ever proven or even truly charged. But about the men he had let close to the family, the doors he had opened, the guests he had brought under the palace roof who had no business there, one of whom had done a wrong to a child of a lesser house that had never fully come to light and never fully been answered. The Duke had not done the wrong. But the Duke had opened the door. And when a man of his rank opens a door and does not care who walks through it, the crown must decide whether he can be trusted near its own. The crown decided he could not. That was the writ. Barred from the presence of the royal children until a court unbarred him. It was not vengeance. It was a judgment, cold and legal and reviewed, that a man who would not guard the door must not be given the keys. And the man tasked that night with being the last locked door, the human writ, the standing order made flesh at the head of 6 white steps, was Corwin Vale. He knew all of it. We all did. And still, when the captain left and the 4 of us stood in the emptying guardroom in the last of the dark, Corwin said the only doubtful thing I ever heard him say about an order. "He'll come," Corwin said. "You know that. He won't stay away on a night like this." His own cousin's wife, 10 years gone, half the realm watching, he'll come. And he'll come up those steps, and he'll expect them to open for him the way they've opened his whole life. He was quiet a moment. And when I stop him, Every soul in that hall is going to think I'm a small, cruel man keeping a great one from mourning. Does that trouble you? I asked him. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. No, he said at last. It doesn't trouble me that they'll think it. It troubles me that I won't be able to tell them why. The order is sealed. I can't stand there and read them the writ, so they'll only see the stopping, not the reason. He settled his gloves. A man has to be able to live with being misunderstood, Halden, if he's going to keep the kind of orders that can't be explained. That's the post. That's all of the post, right there. I did not know then how completely he would be tested on exactly that. I only nodded, and we went to dress, and the palace woke up around us and put on its lights and its flowers and its music, and the great night began. By 8 o'clock, the grand hall was a river of light. They had lit it the way Queen Isolde had liked it, I was told, not the hard blaze of a state banquet but 100 candles in the great chandeliers, so that the whole gilded room seemed to breathe. White flowers everywhere, her flowers, banked along the walls and up the pillars and around the foot of the royal box in drifts, so heavy with scent that you tasted them. A string ensemble in the gallery played the slow, bright music she had chosen for her own daughter's naming years ago, and it filled the room like something remembered rather than heard. The whole court had come, and half the realm's great houses, and the ambassadors of friendly kingdoms in their sashes, and there was that particular hush a room makes when 1,000 people are being quietly, deliberately gentle with one another for the sake of the dead. I took my post at the foot of the steps and Corwin took his at the head, and between us the 6 white risers climbed up to the gallery where, one by one, the royal family came to sit. King Alaric first, in the deep blue of the house with the old star at his breast, gray now at the temples and heavier in the face than the young king the crowds remembered, but still with that stillness of his own that a room bends toward. He did not smile. He was not there to smile. He was there to sit in the light beside an empty chair, for they had left Isolde's chair, her own chair in its place at his right hand, draped in white, and every soul in the hall understood the meaning of it and no one spoke of it. Then the Crown Prince Rowan, tall and careful, a young man carrying his mother's memory the way you carry a full cup on a crowded stair. Then the Princess Ilara, his sister, in pale gray, her face composed and her eyes not. And then the children, and here the whole room softened, because a room always softens for children, and because these 3 were hers, Isolde's, the last living warmth of her in the world. Prince Torin, 11, doing his solemn best to stand as straight as his father. Princess Malin, 9, in a dress the color of the flowers, holding her sister's hand. And little Prince Bram, 6, who did not yet understand what a memorial was, and only knew that it was late and bright and that everyone was being kind to him, and who waved once, shyly, at the great glittering room, so that a soft laugh went through the crowd like a breath of relief. They climbed the steps past Corwin one after another, and to each of them he inclined his head the exact regulation degree, and each of them was gathered up into the gallery and settled into place, and the guard at the head of the steps became once more a fixed point, a thing the eye slid past. The king rose and said a few words. I could not hear them from the floor, only the shape of them, low and even and grieving, and then he sat, and the music lifted, and the memorial of Queen Isolde began in earnest. For an hour it was the most peaceful duty I have ever stood. I want you to hold that hour in your mind, because everything that came after broke against it. The candles, the white flowers and the white chair, the children in the gallery, safe and sleepy and loved, high above the crowd where all could see them and none could reach them. And the 2 of us, Corwin and I, the top and the bottom of the only stair, holding the line that no one in that gentle room even knew was a line. It was a little past 9 when I felt the change. You learn to feel it on this duty. A room has a temperature, and it shifts before anything you can point to has happened. I felt the crowd near the great doors thicken and turn, the way water turns around a stone dropped in it, and I heard the hush change its character, from the soft hush of mourning to the sharper hush of attention, of people going quiet because they are watching something rather than because they are being kind. I did not move my head. You do not move your head. But I moved my eyes, and down the long, bright length of the grand hall, through the parting crowd, I saw the Duke Reynald come in. He had come as I have never seen a barred man come, not creeping, not hooded, not by a side door in the dark. He came up the center of the room in the full blaze of the candlelight, in a coat of deep mourning cut like a prince's, with a single white flower, her flower, at his breast, and he came slowly, and he let himself be seen. He had aged since his glory, gone gray and gaunt, and grief sat on him convincingly, and I will grant him this. He looked that night exactly like a great man come to mourn a great woman. He nodded to the faces he passed. He touched a hand here, murmured a word there. The crowd, which did not know about the writ, which knew only that here was the king's own cousin come at last to honor the good queen, made way for him with a kind of pity and a kind of pleasure, glad to see him, glad the family was gathering, and the murmur that followed him up the hall was warm. He was making for the steps. Of course he was. Where else would a prince of the blood go on such a night but up to the royal box to sit among his kin? And at the head of the steps, Corwin Vale stood and watched him come, and did not move, and I saw because I knew him, because 19 years teaches you to read a still man. I saw him settle his weight the way a man settles before he takes a heavy load. He knew. Long before the Duke reached the foot of my post, Corwin knew what the next minute held, and he was already, quietly, making himself ready to be the most hated man in the kingdom. The Duke came to the foot of the steps, where I stood. Up close the grief in his face was a real thing and a made thing both at once, the way it often is in men who have learned that grief opens doors. His eyes were wet. He smelled of the white flowers and of good wine. He glanced at me, at the sergeant at the bottom of the stair, the way you glance at a piece of furniture you intend to walk past, and he set his polished shoe on the first white riser. I did not stop him. That was not my post. My orders and Corwin's were the same, but the line was his line, the head of the steps, the last riser, the edge of the gallery. A barred man may set foot on the bottom stair. He is not in the presence of the children there. It is at the top, at the threshold of the box itself, that the presence begins and the line falls. The captain had drawn it exactly. Corwin held the line. So I let the Duke pass me, and I turned, and I watched him climb, and I felt my own heart go hard and fast in my chest, because I have never in my life wanted so badly to be wrong about what was about to happen. He climbed 6 steps, slowly, with the dignity of a man who has climbed such steps 1,000 times and never once been asked whether he might. 2nd step, 3rd. The room below had gone very quiet now, watching the Duke go up to the family, a warm, expectant quiet, the quiet of a court that thinks it is about to see a wound begin to heal. 4th step, 5th. And at the 6th, at the top, at the edge of the gallery where the candlelight fell full on the 2 of them, Corwin Vale stepped sideways into the center of the threshold, and stood, and closed the way. He did not touch the Duke. I want that on the record first before anything, because a great deal was said afterward and much of it was false. He did not lay a hand on him. He did not raise his rifle from its rest. He simply moved his own body, one economical step, into the exact center of the opening, so that the last riser led not into the gallery but into the immovable red and black wall of a household guardsman, and he brought his heels together, and he looked the Duke Reynald in the face, and he said, in a voice pitched low and level and just loud enough for the front of the crowd to catch, the words that began the storm. "I'm sorry, Your Grace, you cannot come up here tonight." The Duke Reynald stopped. For a moment he did not seem to understand. It was not, I think, that he had never been refused. It was that he had never been refused here on these steps by a man in the red wool in front of the whole court on his way to his own family. His face did the thing a powerful man's face does when the world briefly fails to behave. A flicker of pure confusion, almost childlike, before the older, harder machinery of his rank came online behind it. "Stand aside," he said, not loudly. He was too practiced for that. He said it the way a man tells a servant the fire's gone low. "I am going up to the king." "You cannot go up, your grace." Corwin did not move. "I'm sorry." "You're sorry." The Duke's voice was still soft, but something in it had begun to shine, a cold light coming up under the grief. "Do you know who I am, soldier?" "I do, your grace." "Then you know that man up there in the blue is my cousin, that I have sat in that gallery since before you could walk, that the woman we are here to mourn tonight held my hand at her own wedding and called me family." His voice caught beautifully on the last word. It would have moved a stone. "And you would keep me, of all the men in this hall, from going up to grieve her with my own blood, on this night." It was, I must tell you, a magnificent thing to hear, and it was designed to be heard. He had raised his voice by the smallest degree on this night, just enough to carry to the nearest ranks of the crowd, and I saw the ripple go out from him, heads turning, faces creasing, a murmur beginning that was not on Corwin's side. "That's the king's cousin. That's Reynald. What is the guard doing? Won't let him up, on the anniversary, to mourn the queen." I felt the room begin ever so slightly to tilt, and it tilted against us. Corwin heard it too. He had to have heard it, and he did not change by a hair. "I understand what tonight is, your grace," he said, "and I am sorry for it more than I can say to you here, but I cannot let you pass. Please don't ask me again, because the answer will be the same, and I would rather not make you hear it twice." Now the Duke's grief cracked, and the thing underneath came out. "You insolent!" He stepped up onto the top riser close, so that they were near enough to share breath, and he lifted one long hand and pointed it not quite at Corwin's chest, an old aristocrat's gesture, the finger of a man used to pointing servants out of rooms. "You will stand down. You will stand down this instant, or I will have that uniform off you before the music stops. Do you imagine you know better than the king who may sit at the king's own side? Do you imagine your captain will thank you for this? For humiliating a prince of the blood in front of the ambassadors of 6 realms? Move aside." And Corwin Vale, who could have said so many things, who could have said "This is the king's own order, sir," sealed this morning under his cipher asterisk, and ended it there, and been the hero of the hour instead of its villain, did not say any of them. He could not. The writ was sealed. To speak its contents aloud in an open hall was itself a breach. The king had barred the Duke quietly deliberately, to spare the family and the realm the scandal of saying why in public. Corwin had been given an order he was forbidden to explain. That was the trap the whole night had built for him, and he had seen it coming since 3 that morning, and he walked into it now with his eyes open. "I cannot tell you why, your grace," he said. "I'm not permitted to. I can only tell you that you cannot pass, and that I am acting on an order I am bound to keep. If you believe I am wrong, there are those in this hall who can lift the order in a word. I am not one of them. I am only the man they set on the step, a beat. And I will keep this step." It was the fairest thing a man could have said, and it did him no good at all, because the crowd could not hear the fairness of it, could only see a soldier barring a grieving prince, and the Duke, quick as a whip, turned the fairness against him. "He admits it," the Duke said, and now he did turn half toward the room, playing to it, his wet eyes sweeping the upturned faces. "You all heard him. He admits he cannot even tell me why. There is no reason, there is no order any decent man would keep. There is only this Jack in a costume deciding on his own small authority on the anniversary of the good queen's death, that her own family is not fit to mourn her together." He let his voice break again. "Is this what she would have wanted? Is it?" The murmur became a sound. Somewhere in the crowd a woman said clearly, "Oh, let him up, for pity's sake." And another voice took it up, and I saw, at the edge of the gallery above, the Crown Prince Rowan rise half out of his seat with a face full of alarm, and I saw the Princess Ilara put a quick hand on the smallest boy's shoulder and draw him back from the rail without seeming to know she did it. The room was turning ugly in the particular way a kind crowd turns ugly, not with anger but with sympathy, aimed like a weapon at the one still figure who would not bend. And in the middle of it, Corwin Vale stood at the head of the steps with his heels together, and his eyes forward and his face perfectly, terribly calm, and held the line, and said nothing, because there was nothing he was permitted to say. I have thought a great deal since about what that hour cost him. It is one thing to hold a door against a man who is clearly a villain, when the whole crowd is with you and the wrong is plain. Any of us can do that. It is barely a test at all. It is a wholly different thing to hold a door against a man the whole world has decided is in the right, when you alone know the thing that would clear you and you are forbidden to say it, and every second you stand there silent the world hates you a little more, and you cannot even lift your eyes to defend yourself. That is the true post. That is the thing the red wool is really for, not the standing still when nothing happens. The standing still when everything does, and everyone is wrong about you, and you let them be, because the order is the order, and the children are the children, and your good name is a small price beside them. The captain came then. I had sent a runner the moment the Duke set foot on the stair, and now the captain of the household guard came fast up the side of the hall, and I saw the relief break over the whole crowd. Here now, here's a sensible man, an officer. He'll sort this foolish soldier out. The Duke saw it too, and turned to the captain with his arms half spread, all wounded reason. Captain, thank God. Will you tell this statue of yours to stand aside and let me go up to my cousin before he makes an even greater fool of himself, and of you? The captain climbed the last steps until he stood beside Corwin at the threshold. He was a hard old soldier, the captain, 40 years in the household, a man who had buried 2 kings. He looked at the Duke. He looked at the room, reading its temper in a glance. And then he did the thing that told me more than anything what kind of man he was. He did not order Corwin aside. He set his own boots on the threshold beside Corwin's, shoulder to shoulder, closing the way twice over, and he said quietly, so that only the front rank could hear, "The guardsman is acting on my instruction, your grace, and on an authority above us both. He will not stand aside, and neither will I if you wish the matter reviewed. It will be reviewed tonight in private before the king. But you will not go up these steps." The Duke stared at him. And then, because he was cleverer than either of them, and more desperate than any of us yet understood, he did the one thing that turned the whole crowd fully and finally against the guard. He sat down. He sat down on the top step, at the feet of the 2 soldiers barring him, an old gray prince of the blood in his mourning coat, and he put his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook, and he wept openly, brokenly, a great man brought low on the steps to his own family, and he said, muffled just loud enough, the words that went round the whole realm by morning. "I only wanted to say goodbye to her, that's all. I only wanted to say goodbye." And the crowd's sympathy became a roar. Not a violent one, a worse one for a guardsman, a righteous one. Voices rose all across the front of the hall. "Shame, shame, let the man up. Have you no heart, on this night of all nights?" And phones came up in 100 hands, screens glowing, catching it all, the weeping prince and the 2 hard soldiers standing over him. And I knew even as it happened that this was the image that would fly across the realm before dawn, and that no words of ours would ever quite catch it. A lord of the court pushed to the front and said loudly that he would have the guard's name and see him broken for it. A woman was crying. The music had stopped. The whole memorial, the whole gentle river of light, had collapsed into this one hot, ugly knot at the head of the steps, and at the center of it Corwin Vale stood like a man in a storm he had chosen not to leave. He looked down once at the weeping Duke, and his face, I was close enough to see it, and I will swear to it, his face was not cold, and it was not proud, and it was not enjoying a single second of what it was doing. It was full of a kind of grief of its own. He did not want to be doing this. He knew exactly what it looked like and exactly what it was costing him, and he did it anyway. And if you have never seen a man do the right thing while the whole world screams that it is the wrong thing, You have not seen the hardest thing a man can do." Up in the gallery, King Alaric had risen. He came to the gilded rail and looked down over it, and slowly, in ranks, the room grew aware of him and quieted, the roar dying back into a held breath, because when the king stands the room must attend to the king. He looked down at the scene at the head of his own steps, his weeping cousin, his 2 soldiers, the frozen crowd, and his heavy gray face gave nothing away. And I felt the whole night hang, for one long moment, on what the king would say, because the king could end it with a word. He had made the order. He could lift it here, now, in front of everyone, and let his cousin come up, and no one would ever know the difference. And Corwin Vale would still be broken for a rule the king himself had chosen to bend. That was the false hope, and it lived for exactly the length of the king's silence. "Cousin," King Alaric said at last, down over the rail, and his voice in the hush carried to every corner, "you should not have come." The Duke lifted his ravaged face. "Alaric, cousin, tell them to let me up. Let me sit beside you and mourn her as we did before all of this, before the lies." "You should not have come," the king said again, and there was no give in it at all, and I heard the crowd's certainty falter for the first time, a ripple of doubt going the other way now, because the king was not behaving like a man whose servant had made a mistake. "The guardsman is right. You will not come up. Not tonight, and not while the order stands." He paused, and something moved in his face, some old, exhausted sorrow. "You know why. Whatever you are telling these good people, you know why." "There is no asterisk, why asterisk?" the Duke cried. And now the mask slipped, just for an instant, and I saw beneath the grief something that was not grief at all, something quick and calculating and afraid, an animal looking for the unwatched exit. "It's a slander. It's her." And he flung a hand up toward the gallery, toward, I realized, not the king but the pale, composed figure of the Princess Alara. "It's their poison. It's always been their poison, keeping me from—" "Enough!" The king did not raise his voice, and it fell like a blade. "You will be shown to a private room, and you will wait, and this matter will be dealt with as it should be, quietly, and away from these people, and away from my children." At the word *children, the king's eyes went briefly, unmistakably, to the 3 small figures the princess had gathered close behind her, and back to the Duke. And in that one glance the whole crowd began, at last, to understand that there was a why after all, and that it had something to do with the children, and that they had been cheering for the wrong man. But the Duke Reynald was not finished. Desperate men rarely are, and he was more desperate than any of us yet knew. He came up off the step. He came up fast, faster than a grieving old man should have been able to, and there was nothing broken about him now. The weeping was gone as if it had been switched off, and his gaunt face was set and white, and he did not go for the king, and he did not turn to flee. He lunged sideways past the captain, who was half turned toward the king, toward the narrow gap at Corwin's other side where the gallery rail met the wall, a gap a determined man might just slip through if the guard's weight was set the wrong way. He had marked it. He had been marking it, I understood, in a sick rush. The whole time, the weeping, the pleading, the appeals to the crowd, all of it had been a long, patient setup to get himself onto that top step close, with the guard's attention split and the king leaning out over the rail and the children drawn to the near edge of the gallery not 30 feet away. He had never come to mourn. He had come to reach them. And now, with the whole room watching the king, he made his move for the gap. He was fast, but Corwin Vale had never once in all of it taken his eyes off the man. And this is the moment the whole story turns on, so I will slow it down and tell it true, exactly as I saw it from 8 feet below. The Duke lunged for the gap. Corwin moved to meet him, not a wild grab, not a soldier's tackle, nothing the phones could later call brutality. He shifted his weight the way he had settled it an hour before, and he brought his shoulder and his forearm across the gap, and he took the Duke's rush on the flat of his own body, the way you take a slammed door, and he stopped him. Cold. The Duke hit the wall of him and rebounded, off balance, one arm flying up, and as it flew up, the front of his fine morning coat swung open, and something inside it caught the candlelight. I saw it. The captain saw it. Half the front rank saw it, and the gasp that went through them was a different sound entirely from the sympathy of a moment before. There was a harness under the Duke Reynald's coat. A slim leather harness, buckled across his chest beneath the mourning black and clipped to it, hanging where his hand had been going all along. Not to his heart in grief, I understood now, but there to the clip was a small flat case, dark, hard-cornered, no bigger than a book, and beside it a second thing longer, wrapped in cloth, that he had carried up 6 steps and through 1,000 people, and past every eye in the kingdom, because a prince of the blood coming to mourn is not a man anyone searches. "Hold him!" Corwin's voice, for the first time all night, cut. It was not loud even now, but it had turned to iron, and the 2 words moved men. I was already coming up the steps. The captain had the Duke's other arm. 2 more of ours were there in a breath. The Duke thrashed, and for a moment his hand got to the clip, and I saw Corwin's gloved hand close over the Duke's wrist. The first and only time he touched him, and hold it away from the case with a grip like a closing vice, and he said, right into the Duke's face, low, "Don't, whatever it is, don't. There are children 30 feet from you. You will not." And the fight went out of the Duke Reynald all at once, the way it goes out of a man who has staked everything on a single throw of the dice and watched it come up wrong. He sagged in our hands. His face, so full of grief an hour ago, so full of calculation a minute ago, was empty now, blasted and gray and old, and he said, in a voice with nothing left in it, the truest thing he said all night. I only wanted them to listen to me. No one would ever listen to me. We took the case off the harness, carefully. The palace security men had come up now, and they took it with the flat professional dread of men who did not know yet what they were holding. We took the cloth-wrapped thing. And we took the Duke Reynald, quietly, with no more force than it takes to walk a broken man, down the far side of the gallery and out through a door the crowd could not see. And the whole thing, from his lunge to his leaving, took perhaps 90 seconds, and it emptied the roar out of the grand hall as if someone had pulled a stopper from the world. I will tell you now what was in the case, because the not knowing is the cruelest part of the telling, and you have waited long enough, though we ourselves did not learn all of it for days. It was not a weapon in the way a rifle is a weapon. That was almost the worst of it. It was cleverer and colder than that. The cloth-wrapped thing was a short length of pipe, capped, of the kind a desperate man builds when he wants a great deal of noise and smoke and panic in an enclosed space more than he wants to kill. A thing that, set off in a candle-lit hall packed to the doors with 1,000 people and a single narrow stair of escape, would not have needed to harm anyone directly to become a catastrophe. The crush alone, the stampede for the doors, the panic in a room with the royal children high on a gallery above the surging crowd, would have done the harming for it. And the flat case was worse and stranger. It held papers and a device to transmit them, and a long, rambling written statement, pages of it, the grievances of the Duke Reynald against the family that had cast him out, the lies, as he called them, the poison, the injustice of the writ that barred him from the children, and his intention, laid out in a hand that shook, to seize the great occasion, the whole realm watching and make them listen, to hold the moment hostage, to stand in the royal box, among the royal family, with the case in his hand and the pipe as his threat, and force the king and the court and the cameras of half the realm to hear him at last, on his terms, with the children close enough to make the threat real. That was what the writ had barred. That was the asterisk why Corwin was forbidden to speak. The court that laid the order had not known this night was coming, could not have known the specific shape of it, but they had known the shape of asterisk him. A man cast out, nursing a wound that had gone bad, a man who had already once opened a door to danger near a child and not cared who came through it, a man the crown had judged, coldly and correctly, could not be trusted in the presence of the king's children. The writ was not cruelty. It was foresight. It was the law standing at the top of the steps, one night before it was needed, saying, "This man does not pass." And when the law could not be there in person, it had put a man there instead, in red wool and a black bearskin, to be the writ made flesh. And that man had held the line against the entire weight of a weeping prince and a roaring crowd in his own ruined name, and had not broken, and because he had not broken, 3 children were sitting safe in the light instead of screaming in a crush in the dark. Corwin Vale had not humiliated a grieving prince on the steps of the royal box. He had stood, alone and hated, between 1,000 people and a catastrophe, on nothing but 9 sealed words and the oldest promise a guardsman makes. He does not pass, and he had kept it when keeping it made him the villain of the hour, because he understood something the roaring crowd did not. That the whole point of the post is to hold the line before anyone can see the reason, and to go on holding it while they curse you, and to be willing, if it comes to it, to be remembered wrongly forever, so long as the door stays shut. The reason that night came in time. It does not always. He would have held it either way. That is the difference between a man keeping an order and a man refusing one, and it is the whole of what the red wool means. The rest of the night I can tell more quickly, though I would not have you think it was quick to live through. When the door closed behind the Duke and the security men, the grand hall stood in a silence I have never heard anywhere else. 1,000 people had 1 minute before been shouting for the guardsman's ruin. Now they stood with the shout still half in their throats and did not know what to do with it. The phones were still up, but no one was filming with any confidence now. The certainty had gone out of them. They had seen the harness. They had seen the case. They had heard the king say, "Away from my children," and heard the 2 words fall differently in the light of what swung open under a morning coat. And a crowd that has been sure of a thing and is suddenly not sure of it is a strange and shame-faced animal. And I watched 1,000 of them turn, by degrees, from certainty to doubt, to the first cold creep of the understanding of how nearly they had cheered a catastrophe up the steps. Corwin had not moved from the threshold. That was the thing that undid me a little watching it. The Duke was gone, the danger was carried away. The captain had stepped back to speak low and fast with the security men, and Corwin Vale simply squared his heels again in the center of the top step, and brought his eyes forward, and became once more the fixed point, the guard at the head of the box, as if nothing had happened at all. As if he had not just been the most hated man in the kingdom for the length of an hour. As if he had not just, quite possibly, saved every soul in the room. He had a post. The post was not finished. The family was still in the gallery and the night was not over, and so he stood his post, and if you had walked into the grand hall in that moment knowing nothing, you would have seen only a still soldier at the top of a stair and never guessed. Above him in the gallery, the family had drawn together. I could see them clearly now from where I stood at the newly cleared threshold. The Princess Alara had all 3 children behind her and slightly to the side, her arms not quite around them but ready, her pale face for once making no attempt to be composed. She had understood of all of them, the fastest and the most completely, and there was a fury in her stillness and a terror underneath the fury, the particular terror of a woman who has just seen how close a thing came to the small ones in her care. The Crown Prince Rowan stood at his father's shoulder, white to the lips. And little Prince Bram, who was 6, who did not understand any of it, tugged at his sister's gray sleeve and asked, in the piping voice of a child that carries further than it should in a silent room, "Why did the man cry? Is he sad?" And the Princess Alara looked down over the rail at Corwin Vale, at the guardsman who had just stood between her brothers and something she could not yet name to the boy, and she said, gently, to the child, but not only to the child, "No, sweetheart, he wasn't sad, he was pretending." And then, still looking down at Corwin in a voice that the front of the hall could just hear, "But someone was watching. Someone always watches. That's what they're for." Corwin did not look up. You do not look up. But I saw the smallest thing move in his jaw, and I knew he had heard her, and I knew what it meant to him, and I thought, there. That one sentence from the one person in the hall who had understood is worth more to him than all the cheering in the world would have been. He had been ready to be misunderstood forever. He had made his peace with it 3 that morning, and instead, against all likelihood on this one night, someone had seen. But most of the hall had not, yet not fully, and here I have to tell the part that shames us as a household a little, because for a long, ugly stretch of that night, even after the harness, even after the case, the crowd's first instinct was not to thank the guard. It was to argue about him. You would not think it possible, but grief and fright do strange things to a room, and there were those in that hall, great lords, some of them, men who should have known better, whose pride would not let them turn all the way around from what they had just been shouting. A knot of them gathered near the foot of the steps, and the loudest was the lord who had earlier sworn to have Corwin's name and see him broken, and he was not, even now, quite willing to be wrong. "It's monstrous," I heard him say, in the carrying voice of a man rebuilding his own dignity out loud. "Whatever the fellow was carrying, and we don't know what it was, we've only their word the guard could not have known that. He barred a prince of the blood on a guess, on a whim. That he happened to be right is luck, not judgment, and I'll not have a household soldier deciding on luck who may approach the throne." He did not decide anything. The captain had come back, and he said it flatly into the lord's face without ceremony. He kept an order. The order came from the king's own bench under the king's own cipher laid this morning. The guardsman never saw what the man carried. He did not need to. He was told the duke does not pass, and the duke did not pass. That is not luck, my lord. That is discipline. It is the only thing standing between your throne and every clever, patient, ruined man who ever decided the realm owed him a hearing. You would do well to be grateful for it instead of frightened of it. He let that sit. As for deciding who may approach the throne, no, the guardsman does not decide that. The king decides it, and the law decides it, and the guardsman only holds it against exactly the pressure you are putting on him right now, which is the pressure that man was counting on. He wept and he pleaded, and he turned you all against the one soldier in his way precisely so that the way would open. It very nearly did, not because the soldier wavered, because you did. That silenced the lord, and it silenced the knot around him, and I saw the shame land on them properly at last, and I was glad of it, though I took no pleasure in the captain having to say it. It should not have needed saying, but it always does. There is always, in every hall, the man who would rather the guard had been wrong so that his own cheering had not been, and the only answer to him is the plain fact of the order, laid down in front of him until he cannot look away from it. Now let me go back for a moment, because you cannot understand what Corwin did on those steps without understanding one thing about Corwin, and the memorial is the wrong place to have learned it, and I only learned it myself long after, and it changes how you see every second of that hour. I told you I had seen him weep once in the dark of the guardroom on the anniversary of something he never named. This is what it was. Corwin Vale had not been born to the household. He had come up from a hard town in the north, a place of shut mills and short tempers, the youngest of a large poor family, and when he was a boy 9 or 10, the age of the little princess in the gallery, there had been a night that made him. I have only the bones of it from an old sergeant who trained us both and who told me the story once, quietly, as a thing I should know if I was ever to understand the man I served beside. There had been a fire in the row of houses where Corwin's family lived, started by a man who was owed money and drunk, and past caring who was inside. And in the smoke and the shouting, when the grown men were running the wrong way and the crowd in the narrow street was surging and screaming, and no one was thinking, there had been one door, the door of the house, where the smallest children of the row had been put to bed, and a boy of 9 or 10 had planted himself in front of it and would not let the panicking crowd break it down to loot what they thought was inside, and had held it, a child, against grown men, screaming at them that there were little ones asleep in there and they would not pass, and he had held it until the men who mattered came, and the little ones were carried out the back safe, every one. That boy was Corwin Vale, and he never spoke of it, and he never once used it, and he would have been furious to know I had told you. But I want you to hold it against the picture of him at the head of the steps, the still soldier, hated by 1,000, holding a door against a weeping man because there were children 30 feet behind him. And I want you to understand that he had done this exact thing before, at exactly that age, before he had any red wool or any order or any word for what he was. The order that morning had not made him into the man who held that line. It had only, for one night, given a name and a warrant to the thing he had already been since he was a boy in the smoke, screaming at a crowd that they would not pass. That is why he did not waver. That is why the crowd's fury slid off him like rain off a roof. He had held a door against a mob for the sake of children once already, with far less certainty and far more fear, and survived it, and been made by it. An hour of ugliness in a candle-lit hall was, to a man like that, almost nothing. He had been standing at the head of those steps his whole life. The palace had merely, at last, given him the post. They did not clear the hall. The king would not have it. He came to the front of the gallery again once the danger was carried away, and he raised his hand, and when the room had gone still he spoke to it, not about the Duke, not a word about the Duke, but about her, about Isolde, gathering the shattered knight back up in his 2 hands and setting it gently on its feet again. He said that his wife had loved this hall full of light and music, and would not have wished it emptied by fear. He said that they would go on, that the ensemble would play the last of what she had chosen, that they would remember her as she was, and not let this one dark thread unravel the whole. And the room, wrung out and ashamed and grateful, let him do it, and the music came back up, thin at first and then full, and 1,000 people stood in the candlelight and let the good queen's music wash the ugliness out of them. And up in the gallery the 3 children were drawn back to the rail, safe, and the little one waved again at the great bright room, and this time the laugh that went through the crowd had tears in it. Corwin stood his post through all of it. He stood it until the last note, and until the family had risen and been gathered up and taken out through the private ways, each of them passing him once more at the head of the steps, and this time the king himself, going by, paused. He did not speak in front of the room. He only stopped for the length of a held breath in front of the guardsman who had held his line and looked him full in the face, king to soldier, and inclined his head, the king's own head, the smallest degree before he went on. It is not much, written down. In that hall, in that moment, in front of that court, it was everything. A king does not bow to a guardsman. He did not bow. But he inclined his head deliberately, where all could see, to the man the whole court had spent an hour reviling, and every lord and lady in that hall saw it and understood it, and the last of the crowd's doubt died where it stood. The king had answered the question the loud lord had asked. He had answered it without a word. Only when the family was gone, and the hall was emptying, and the candles were guttering low, was Corwin relieved of his post. And then he was summoned, not dismissed to the guardroom, summoned to a small warm chamber off the private ways where the king had chosen to deal with the matter, as he had promised, quietly and away from the court. The captain took Corwin up, and because I had sent the runner and seen the harness and could give account, I was taken up too, and so I was in the room for the last of it, and I can tell you what was said. The chamber was small and old and lined with books, and there was a fire in it, and it was very quiet after the great hall. The king was there, and the Princess Ilara, and the Crown Prince Rowan, and 2 grave men of the crown's bench who had been sent for, and in a chair by the far wall, guarded, no longer weeping, no longer pleading, only gray and finished, the Duke Reynald. The king did not sit. He stood by the fire with his back half to it and looked at his cousin for a long time before he spoke, and when he spoke it was without anger, which was somehow worse than anger. "They will tell me," the king said, "that I should have had you searched at the door, that the fault is the household's for letting you into the hall at all, and there is truth in it, and it will be looked to. But you and I both know that no one searches a prince of the blood coming to mourn. You knew it. You built your whole night on it. You put on her flower," and here, for the first time, something raw came into the king's voice. You put on Isolde's own flower, and you walked up my hall in mourning, and you meant to use the safe passage her memory bought you to carry that thing to within 30 feet of her children. That is the part I will not forgive, cousin. Not the grievance. Men have grievances. I might even, God help me, have listened to yours once if you had come to me like a man instead of like a thief in the night with a bomb under your coat and my children as your leverage. But you used her asterisk. You used the night we set aside for her. There is no bottom under that. There is nothing under that at all. The Duke Reynald did not answer for a while, and then he lifted his ruined face and said the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything else from that night, because it was the truest and the saddest and the most damning thing a man could say. I told myself I wasn't going to hurt anyone. That's what I told myself. I only wanted them to see me, to have to look at me and listen just once, the way they used to before he stopped. His hands in his lap were shaking. I built the thing so it would frighten, not kill. I swore that to myself over and over, as if that made it, as if a man could carry that into a room full of 1,000 people and children on a gallery and call it only frightening asterisk. I believed my own story. That's the whole of it, Alaric. I believed my own story right up until that soldier stopped me on the step and I saw his face, and I saw that he knew exactly what I was, and I couldn't lie to him the way I'd been lying to myself. He wouldn't take the grief. He wouldn't take the pleading. He just looked at me and would not move, and I hated him for it, and he was the only honest thing in that entire hall. He turned his head then and found Corwin where he stood by the door, and he said to him directly, "You were right to stop me. God forgive me. You were right." No one spoke for a moment. The fire cracked. Then the king turned to the men of the bench, and the law took the Duke Reynald away, and I will not follow him further, because his story ends here as far as this one is concerned. He was dealt with as such a man must be dealt with, quietly, gravely, without the spectacle he had spent his whole life courting, which was perhaps the last cruelty and the last mercy the crown could do him at once. The writ that had barred him from the children was not lifted. It was made permanent, and whatever hearing he had wanted, the whole realm his stage, he never got. He got a small locked room and a long silence and the slow understanding of what he had nearly done, which is a heavier sentence than any court could hand a man, and I do not envy him it. But the family stayed in the small warm chamber after he was gone, and what happened next was the part I truly came to tell. The Princess Ilara crossed the room to Corwin Vale. She stood in front of him, the king's daughter, the dead queen's daughter, in her pale gray mourning, and she looked up at the guardsman who kept his eyes forward, because even now, even here, you do not meet a royal eye unless bidden. And she said, "Look at me, please, guardsman. I am asking, not ordering. There's a difference, and I want you to know I know it." He lowered his eyes to hers. "An hour ago," the princess said, 1,000 people wanted you broken, and I sat up there and could do nothing but watch and pray you would not listen to them. You had no way of knowing what he carried. You had only the order and your own name against it, and every reason in the world to step aside and let a poor grieving prince go up to his family and be the hero of a sad, sweet night. It would have been so easy. It would have been kind asterisk on the face of it. And it would have put that thing 30 feet from my brother's. Her composure broke, finally, all the way, and she did not try to gather it. You stood there and let 1,000 people hate you rather than take the easy, wrong thing. Do you understand what you kept from us tonight? Do you understand what you are? Corwin was quiet a moment, and then he said the only long thing I ever heard him say to anyone above his own rank, and he said it plainly, without any performance in it, the way he said everything. "I understand, Your Highness, that I was given an order I couldn't explain, and that it made me look cruel, and that I let it, because the not explaining was part of the keeping. That's the whole of what I did. I didn't know what was under his coat. I want to be honest with you about that, because there are already men saying I somehow knew and I didn't, and I won't wear a courage I didn't have. I only knew he was barred and that I was the last door, and that a door that opens when the crowd shouts loud enough is not a door at all. He paused. The reason came in time tonight. I'm grateful for that. But I need you to know I would have kept it just the same if the reason had never come. If he'd been exactly the grieving old man he pretended to be, and I'd barred him for nothing and the whole realm had gone on hating me for it forever, I'd have done the same, because that's the post, Your Highness. You don't hold the line only when you can see the wolf. You hold it because you swore to, and you let them think what they'll think, and you trust that the ones who set the order knew something you weren't told. Most nights there's no wolf, and you're hated for nothing, and you hold it anyway. Tonight there was a wolf, but the holding was the same holding. The Princess Alara looked at him for a long moment. And then she did a thing that was not in any protocol, that no one told her to do, that I have never seen a royal do before or since. She took his gloved hand in both of hers, the hand that had closed over the Duke's wrist and kept it from the clip, and she bowed her head over it, the way you bow over something you are thanking God for, and she held it there. And she did not say anything at all, because there was nothing left that words could carry. And Corwin Vale, who had stood unmoved through an hour that would have broken most men, stood there and let the king's daughter bow over his hand, and his eyes were bright, and I looked away, because some things a man should be allowed to feel without a sergeant watching. The king saw all of it and let it be, and only at the end said quietly, "There will be a decoration, and a review of the writ and of how the man came so far, and heads will be spoken to about the door. But the decoration is not a reward, guardsman. I want you to understand that. It is a record. So that when men in years to come read the story and hear only that a soldier once barred a grieving prince from the royal box, there will be beside it the true thing, the king's own mark, saying, 'He was right and we knew it, and here is our word on it forever.'" He looked at Corwin. "You made your peace with being misunderstood. I honor that. But I am the king, and I need not leave a good man misunderstood if I can help it, so I will not. That is nearly the end of it. Let me finish honestly, because an honest ending is the only kind this story has earned. The image the crowd had made, the weeping prince, the two hard soldiers standing over him, did fly across the realm by morning, exactly as I had feared it would. For half a day, no more, Corwin Vale was the cruel guard who had barred a grieving man from the royal box, and there were angry voices, and a lord or two who had been shamed in the hall tried to keep the anger going out of doors, and for a few hours the household braced for a storm. But the truth, when the crown chose at last to let a careful, measured portion of it be known, not the sealed writ, not the Duke's whole ugliness, but enough, that the Duke had been lawfully barred, that he had brought a dangerous thing into a hall of 1,000 people, that the guardsman had kept an order that protected the king's children. The truth, once it caught, ran faster than the false picture ever had. By the second morning, the country that had wanted Corwin Vale broken wanted to know his name and shake his hand. That is the way of crowds. They are not wicked. They are only fast, and they judge on what they can see, and the whole tragedy and the whole necessity of the guard's post is that he must so often act on what they cannot. Corwin, for his part, wanted no part of the second wave any more than he had deserved the first. He went back to his post. He stood the head of the steps again within the week, immaculate, motionless, eyes forward, a fixed point the room turned around, and if you had walked into the grand hall you would never have known that this was the man half the realm was now writing songs about, because he did not carry it. He had been ready to carry the hatred forever. He was not going to be undone by the praise. Both were weather. The post was the post. The decoration was given, as the king had said it would be, quietly, without a great ceremony, which suited Corwin better than any spectacle could have. And the king kept his other word too. The record was made in the household's own book in plain language, so that the story would never again stand alone as *A guard once barred a grieving prince. Beside it now stands the true account, under the king's own hand, and the last line of it, I have read it, is the king's, and it says only, he held the line before he knew the reason. That is why we set such men upon our steps. I go back sometimes in my mind to the moment before any of it, to the guardroom at 3:30, and the sealed writ, and Corwin settling his gloves, and saying that a man has to be able to live with being misunderstood if he's going to keep the kind of orders that can't be explained. I did not fully understand him then. I understand him now. Because the thing about that night that I have never been able to shake is how close the easy, kind, wrong thing came to winning. It would have cost Corwin nothing to step aside. It would have made him beloved. The crowd was begging him to do it. The grieving prince was begging him to do it. Every soft and decent instinct in a good man's chest was begging him to do it. And a lesser man, not a wicked man, only a lesser one, a reasonable one, a man who wanted the crowd to like him, would have stepped aside and been thanked for it, and never in his life known what he had let walk up those steps. That is the whole terror and the whole glory of the post. The guard at the head of the steps does not get to know, most nights, whether there is a wolf. He gets only the order and the hatred and the long temptation of the kind, easy, wrong thing. And he holds the line anyway. He holds it for the nights there is no wolf, when he is hated for nothing and never thanked. He holds it so that, on the one night in 10,000 when the wolf does come up the steps in a mourning coat with her flower at his breast, the door is already shut, and was always going to be shut, and the children in the light above him never even know how near the dark came. They gave Corwin Vale a medal for the night the wolf came. But I served beside him 19 years, and I will tell you what I believe. The medal was for that one night, and the man was made for all the others. For the 1,000 quiet posts where nothing happens and no one watches and the line is held anyway, out of nothing but the oldest promise a guardsman makes. He does not pass. We said it back to the captain, all 4 of us, in the dark before the flowers came. But only one of us had to stand at the top of the steps and mean it against the whole weight of the world. He meant it. He would have meant it if the reason had never come, and gone to his grave a misunderstood and a lesser thought of man, and it would have been the same holding, and the children would have been just as safe, and that not the medal, not the king's inclined head, not the princess bowing over his hand. That is the thing I most want set down plainly, before I am too old to set anything down at all. The line was held before anyone knew why. That is the post, that is the whole of the post. And that is why, on the night the disgraced Duke came up the 6 white steps to the royal box with murder folded quiet under his grief, a still man in red wool who was hated by 1,000 people did not move, and everyone in the end understood why.